It's Monday, the 26th of September. This is Politics Live from the Labour Party conference in Liverpool. Joining me today, Shadow Trade Secretary Nick Thomas-Symonds, the Financial Times' Whitehall editor Sebastian Payne, Miatta Fahnbulleh of the left-of-centre think tank the New Economics Foundation, and Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Greater Manchester. Today, as the pound is buffeted on the financial markets, the Shadow Chancellor prepares to address Labour Party conference.
What they did on Friday was irresponsible, reckless, as well as being grossly unfair.
But the Chancellor is staying the course and hinted on more tax cuts to come.
We've only been here 19 days. I want to see over the next year, people retain more of their income.
Here, calls for more passion in fighting the government's economic plans.
They've drawn the battle lines, they've set out their stall, and I think it's for us this week to sort of kind of see that, respond to it, take the fight to them and win.
Should Labour MPs join workers on the picket line?
Keir Starmer should be here today. What's going on?
Well, welcome to the Labour Party conference. Let's take a look at some of the front pages following that dramatic financial statement on Friday. Let's start, first of all, with the Mail front page. Kwasi Kwarteng's boost for families. This is on the front page of The Eye. They are looking at something slightly different, but along the same lines in terms of responding. Hopefully the papers will come up in just a moment. If they don't, I will basically paraphrase for you what they are saying. Jitters in the markets, as you have seen all morning, and the same within some parts of the Conservative Party. Let's start then opening our question to our panel. The government has moved the political goalpost with that dramatic statement from the Chancellor on Friday, Nick. Lots of tax cuts and borrowing. What do you make of Labour's response? The government is, so to speak, a moving target. Are you going to be able to score?
Well, I don't think it's so much just speaking about it in those terms, Joe. This is about families up and down the country. When you've had a government and a chancellor on Friday who gave what was in effect a budget that was extraordinarily reckless. He's like a gambler in the casino and continuing to gamble.
What people want to know is, what's Labour's response? Are you going to be able to hit that moving target politically and electorally?
Absolutely, and what we are setting out and have already been setting out, and we're sitting here today in anticipation of the Shadow Chancellor's speech. She'll be talking about the National Wealth Fund that we will be creating to invest in jobs and industry up and down the country. And we're also showing our very clear sense of priorities. This is a government standing up for a very small number of wealthy people when it's the rest of our people in the country who are struggling.
All right.
It's them we stand alongside.
We're going to interrogate some of the things that you have responded with so far. Do you think Labour is set at this moment, that they know what they're doing in responding to what the government said on Friday?
In some ways, it is an open goal because there's so much ideological water between what Liz Truss is doing and what Sir Keir Starmer is proposing in terms of the form and shape of their government. But I do think there are some traps for Labour here. So number one, there will probably be, if and when the markets stabilise, some kind of sugar rush in terms of the economy. You will see it's what you'd expect of tax cuts of this nature. And in that sense, there is a danger that people might start to feel better off and say, hang on a minute, maybe this thing is working. Obviously, in the short term, the longer term, there's the much bigger question about what this does to the debt pile and whether it's going to be sustainable. But I think at this precise moment, Labour seems to be in the right place, and all you have to do is look at the pound and look at the markets, and that's your critique of the government.
And we will have a look at that in just a moment. Do you think the response so far, and of course they haven't had very long, and this is the start of the conference, but so far from what you've heard, has it been radical enough in terms of countering what the government set out?
Well, look, I think we've got a very bold strategy by the Conservatives, in my view, bold in the wrong ways, because essentially that budget was a budget for the rich. And the idea behind it is that if you line the pockets of the wealthy, if you line the pockets of big business, that filters down to people. And I think the history for the last 10, 15 years has shown us that that strategy has failed, which is what we're seeing in the market. I think it's a reaction to that. I think for Labour, they need to show that they're on the side of the middle and those at the bottom. So we've seen ideas coming around, a big energy and green transition package. I think that is exciting. We need to see the details. But for me, this comes back to how is this going to help people with their pockets? How is this going to help boost living standards that have pretty much been stagnant for the last 12 years?
What do you think of the response so far? You've already set your stall out slightly differently on one particular key area, and that was the basic rate of tax. Broadly, is Labour, are you ready to take on the government and capitalise on it?
Well, I've been really encouraged by the clear condemnation of the decision to just give massive tax cuts to the wealthiest. How can that be the right priority in a cost of living crisis? I guess where I would caution is it's already becoming a Westminster debate, or the optics of doing this, I think as Seb was saying, or doing... Just let me finish the point.
Yeah.
You know, the issue is a cost of living crisis. People aren't going to feel better off. People are going to feel worse off. And they haven't done anything for people throughout the autumn and the winter. And that's
well, except for the massive intervention in terms of the energy bills.
Sorry?
Except for the massive intervention.
That just stops people's bills going higher. They're already high. It just stops them going higher. So do people feel that?
So what would you want Labour to do?
The cost of food is going up. You know, that's the issue. And I think there's been a good start. There's been clear condemnation. On the issue about the basic rate of tax, let me just say something clear about that. In my role in Greater Manchester, I am having to prepare now for the potential of a wave of industrial disputes, so particularly in the fire service. Firefighters have had real terms pay cuts for a decade. So you cannot in any way say that they are wrong to go out to try and get a pay increase. For me, that is a higher priority. Public sector pay, to make sure public services run throughout the autumn and the winter, that's a higher priority than tax cuts right now. And that's what I said yesterday.
But if that's a higher priority, would you like to see your colleagues on the shadow front bench say yes to inflation-busting pay rises?
I'm not saying that. I'm not
What are you
calling for
saying?
that. I'm saying there needs to be a one-year pay settlement with firefighters, with nurses. Nurses' pay. Look at the NHS.
At what level,
Let me answer a question, Joe, before you
level?
interrupt. Nurses' pay. The NHS is in a critical state. If we do not intervene soon to give a fair pay settlement for nurses and other health professionals through the winter, we will be in a terrible position come January. And that's what I'm saying. That is the first priority on public finances right now.
All right, well, that's Andy Burnham's first priority. Is it your first priority? Because you're not going to join workers on the picket line. You've made that clear, and there are very credible reasons for you saying that, even if the unions would like you to join them there on the picket lines. But what size pay rises are acceptable?
Well, of course, working people having money in their pockets is our priority. Absolutely, that's what we've been saying for months and months. In terms of what a fair settlement is in particular areas, what we've said as a Labour government we would be doing is getting people around the table to actually do it. The Conservative Party in government has, at best, frankly, been sitting on the sidelines. At worst, actually making the disputes even worse than they need to be. So what we are saying to people is a Labour government will be an activist government that will be getting people around the table to find solutions.
Is that enough?
I absolutely agree with everything that Nick says.
Yeah, but is it enough?
You've got to get round the table. The only thing I would say, the final thing I would say about the 20p issue is I was speaking to my son this morning. We were having a chat about it. He's in his early 20s, doing his first job. I said, well, I'll get £375 from it. I don't need it. And he will get, I think, 75, 100. So it doesn't actually get money in the right places either.
But it will save some money for everyone earning above 12,000.
Here's the point, though. We are in a cost of... You don't seem to understand that we're in a cost of living crisis where people can't afford food, people can't pay the bills. They are the people most impacted by the cost of living crisis. They need the most help, not people earning over £50,000.
Well, do you want to defend it then?
Well, what we've said is that we will be reintroducing the 45 pence rate because the very wealthiest in our society are not the top
You're not going
priority.
to keep the penny off basic
No,
rate.
because we are looking at every possible way we can to put money in the pockets of working people.
But Andy just said it's not going to be putting enough money in the pockets of working people.
I'm just saying that the basic rate, it comes in April anyway, and there's an autumn and a winter of real hardship for people, so it doesn't help with that. But at the same time, it gives more money to the wealthiest. I'm saying give money in terms of benefits uplifts for people on universal credit, and also resolve public sector pay ahead of the winter. Otherwise, it won't be a winter of discontent, it will be a winter of danger Lives will be on the line. It's that serious.
Well, do you understand what Andy is saying?
No, absolutely. And what Andy is saying about the priority of this winter is absolutely and entirely correct.
But you don't agree on this rather fundamental point about cutting the basic rate of income tax.
But the point is this. I mean, Andy does an absolutely fantastic job as the Mayor of Greater Manchester, and Andy's job is to, like all the leaders of our devolved administrations, our mayors, to speak about priorities, and that's exactly what he's doing extremely well. What I'm setting out is what the priority of the next Labour government would be, and I've been clear that our priority is working people up and down the country, and he's right to say, and I'll just finish this point, that doesn't come in any event until next April, and we've been making the point for months about the updating of benefits, which the way the Chancellor was doing it was based on an inflation figure that was way out of date. These are huge priorities.
Joe, my argument's not with Nick at all. I agree with what Nick's saying. I'm arguing with the government here. They've done nothing their budget.
But you do disagree on the Labour front bench response, which is to say we would reinstate the 45 pence at the top rate, but we wouldn't at the bottom basic rate.
I mean, all I can say is I didn't know what the Labour position was when I spoke yesterday, and I spoke in the way that I've just done now, saying as I see it from where I am, and I just gave my view, and I'm standing by that view. But overall, Labour are saying the right things, they are doing the right things. I think they should probably look at this issue again. I think they should look at the electoral reform issue again. But this conference feels to me like a get ready for government conference. I think we're seeing good speeches from the shadow cabinet. I think the Tories made a catastrophic economic and political mistake on Friday.
That's good, but you want more passion. We heard you there in the headlines. What do you want? What do you mean, more passion? From Keir Starmer, from Nick Thomas-Symonds?
I think we're at that stage of the cycle now where they've come so far and done a good job because there's a steady lead in the polls, and that's so far job done. But if I remember back to the time when Labour came into government last time for the first time, you then have to kind of go beyond and reach people with the power of your own narrative. And I think that's the next test. Nick would agree, I'm sure. This is the next thing now that we're needing to do. But we've built the platform to do it.
I think one interesting thing about this conference is all the people you see and speak to, it does feel like Labour is on a trajectory towards government. I mean, that is the overall vibe of Liverpool. But I think if you look at the times Labour has won elections, it's the exception, not the default. And I think Labour does have to be careful about sort of almost boring its way into power. And I think that's what Andy is getting at here, that you're very passionate about what you speak about and what you campaign for.
I want to know what Miatta thinks about this, but if you're outside looking in, it can't be too Westminster-y. I think you could have come back to it. The cost of living crisis is the be-all and end-all. And if you can't speak with passion about people's lives and livelihoods...
I feel your frustration here in the sense I can sense it. Do you?
Yeah, look, in the end, I think it's important to say Labour isn't in government, the government's in government. I think Andy is right that we are in an immediate cost of living crisis and therefore we need some short-term measures. So I think the Labour Party needs to be putting pressure on the government to do things like, for example, a windfall tax on energy producers, which you could use to then fund a cost of living allowance. We've costed it. We think you could raise up to 22 billion with a tougher windfall tax.
You'd still be borrowing a lot of money if you were going to do the sort of intervention that the government's done on energy bills.
On energy, they could do it for 6 months and then move to something like free basic energy, which is what we're proposing. But the critical point is they have let the big energy producers off the hook. They could tax them with a tougher windfall tax, and they could use that money in order to provide a cost of living allowance that would help families on low incomes and families in the middle, because Andy's right. People are struggling. Yes, they've taken the sting off, but for a lot of people, the sorts of price rises that are coming are still completely unaffordable.
Seb?
I think the issue, though, is when we're talking about this situation now, I don't think the general election is going to be till 24. I know you've said, Andy, you think it might be in the next 12 months, but given what's happening with the markets, given the economic situation, I think Liz Truss will want to wait as long as possible. And when you get to that point in 2 years, the slogan for this conference is a fairer, greener future, which is something you could see on the bottle of Fairly Liquid. It's not a big, inspiring vision for what the country should look like. And I think Labour's got a very good critique of the problems of the UK, but it risked getting into the territory it was in 2015, where it just looked as if everything's very bad, we can diagnose that, but what is the big answer to this stuff? And I think that's the challenge for Rachel Reeves and for Keir Starmer.
I do agree, but let's just pick on one thing that's been announced today. Rail in public ownership. So Louise Hay, in my view, that's something that everyone here will get behind. I was standing on a platform for an hour this morning. The northwest of England will cheer to the rafters anybody who says get the trains sorted out. That's the kind of policy I think that will please people. Get the train fares down. I've put a cap on bus fares in Greater Manchester already, £2 maximum fare. That Labour should say that will become an England policy. You know, that everywhere will permanently have London-level bus fares. That is the kind of thing I think is needed to sort of really cut through in the real world.
Right, well, on that, and actually responding to what Seb said, what is the Labour government going to do that will transform people's lives? You've suggested the announcement on nationalising the rail industry, also a big announcement on buses, or your proposal for it. But what else?
Our climate investment pledge is £28 billion of investment.
And we know that.
And getting to net zero each and every year of the Parliament. That is an enormous investment in transforming our economy, getting growth and opportunity in every single part of the country. That is a significant budget. You'll be seeing more of the detail on that set out, but that will be transformational.
You say it'll be transformational, and you have set out a critique, obviously, of the government announcement on Friday and the way Seb has said. But actually, Labour is still supporting vast swathes of Kwasi Kwarteng's borrowing programme, and you are. Well, you were supporting the cut in national insurance contributions. That's about £13 billion
we opposed it
a year.
In the first
you
place.
Support the cut to the basic rate of income tax. That's £5 billion a year, and you support the cap on energy bills, which costs £10 billion every single month. Should you be supporting that scale of the government's borrowing programme?
No, our fiscal rules are that you only borrow to invest. You don't borrow for day-to-day spending. We'd have had a much more, firstly, a more extensive windfall tax. We'd have backdated it, for example, from May to January. But in addition to that, we would not be borrowing for day-to-day spending. That is the reckless thing the government is doing. That is the gamble they are taking. That's why the markets are so spooked by what the government
But you
has
do
done.
accept you would still borrow to quite a large extent. So the scale may be slightly different.
No, not for day-to-day spending. That's the difference. We would borrow to invest, and that's so important. And particularly, you've seen the difference. When the government has borrowed for day-to-day spending, you've seen how the markets have reacted.
This is really critical, because the markets are reacting because they have confidence in what the government's doing. I think there's a difference between borrowing to invest in things like the climate transition, where there is a long-term payback, where actually multiple generations will benefit, and borrowing for a tax giveaway to the rich, which is essentially what the government's done, where it's not clear how that's going to drive economic performance. And that is the problem, and I think that's why the market's reacting, and we've got to make that distinction really clear.
We're going to look.
It's not that borrowing's bad, it's what you do with that money in order to drive your economy.
We're going to look at the markets in just a moment. I think you have to go, but just before you do, if there was one thing you wanted to hear this week, apart from the announcement today on rail nationalisation, what would it be?
Well, it would have been that, and that's just been made, so I'm really pleased about that.
Anything else? What would be the thing that would transform it for you this week?
I would like to hear from the party something about nurses' pay, firefighters' pay, care workers' pay. These are people who are going to be out, the people we clapped as a country, and now they're forgotten and they're out there. How are they going to make it work this winter? And bear in mind, that's, for me, I worry about these things, because if the firefighters don't get, I'll have to spend public money in a different way, providing fire cover.
So would you like a figure put on the sort of
So I would
pay
like
rise?
to hear the party say there has to be not a 3, just a 1-year cost of living deal for all of those workers who we will all need to keep the country running this winter. And I've not heard that yet. From public sector pay has not been sufficiently prioritised certainly not by the government, but also I'd like to hear a little more from Labour on it as well.
Well, are you going to please Andy Burnham with an announcement around that?
I'm sure Andy was as delighted as I was by the announcement that on the national minimum wage we'll be instructing the Low Pay Commission to take into account the cost of living, which is essential support that people need. And we absolutely stand for fair pay across the economy, and that's what we'll be speaking out on in the months ahead.
All right, Andy Burnham, thank you very much for joining us. Enjoy the rest of the conference. The Mayor of Greater Manchester there, here with us at Labour Party conference here in Liverpool. Let's talk about the markets. I said that we would. I don't know if we can yet show the graphic of what's happened to the pound against the dollar. If it comes up, then we'll refer to it. But we saw the drop on Friday. We saw it drop further when markets opened this morning. It went down to 1.03, I think, against the dollar, and it's rallied somewhat. What is your response now, Seb, in terms of talking to people in government about what's happened to the markets?
Well, I think obviously the pound going to its lowest ever level is not something anyone in government wanted to see or predicted was going to see when the fiscal statement, which was a budget and all but name, was delivered on Friday. But I think the next step of what really is going to come is interest rate, and there's going to be a lot of pressure on the Bank of England now, because when rates were raised last week, they didn't quite go as high as I think some people would have thought. But within government and the Conservative Party, I think that the Tory MPs are split into two camps. First of all, the more right-wing libertarian ones say, we're doing the right thing, we've got to just hold our nerve until things stabilise. And that's the message you've seen of Kwasi Kwarteng when he says, markets move, it's not my job to comment on them. But there's an awful lot of more moderate Conservative MPs who are saying, have we got a grip on this situation? Is there the right level of competence there? Because the danger is, if this situation gets worse and it develops into a Black Wednesday-esque problem on the pound, I think there's a big concern about would the Truss government be able and have the know-how to act and deal with that? Because there's a relatively fresh team within government. You know, both the Chancellor and the Prime Minister have been in the job less than a month. A lot of the people around them are not the most experienced people. And don't forget, of course, Sir Tom Scholar, who is the permanent Secretary of the Treasury. Who
they sent him packing.
They sent him packing, the first thing they did. So I would say it's a weird mix of nervousness and confidence at exactly the same time.
In terms of that market reaction, yes, Kwasi Kwarteng has said he's not that worried about it at the moment, and actually implied that it is down to a change. Oh, we can go in to Rachel Reeves.
It is a privilege to stand here as your Shadow Chancellor under Keir Starmer's leadership. But I know what a responsibility this is too. We are facing a national emergency. Energy prices up. The cost of the weekly food shop up. People's wages not keeping up. On Friday, the Chancellor had an opportunity to set out a serious response to the cost of living crisis, and he failed. What did we get instead? A tax cut for the wealthiest 1%, increased bankers' bonuses, and more than £50 billion piled onto the national debt every single year. They didn't just break their own fiscal rules for the 10th time in 12 years. In one go, they borrowed more than in any single budget since 1972. With inflation already high and interest rates already rising, the message from financial markets was clear on Friday. And this morning, that message is even more stark. Sterling is down. That means higher prices as the costs of imports rise. The cost of government borrowing is up. That means more taxpayers' money will go into paying the interest on our government debt. And in turn, that means the cost of borrowing for working people will now go up too, with higher mortgage repayments for families. And all for what? Not to invest in the industries of the future, not for our NHS, and not for our schools, but for tax cuts for the wealthiest. A return to trickle-down economics, an idea that has been tried, has been tested, and has failed. Why should my constituents in Leeds West, why should people in Merseyside pay for tax cuts for those who are already the wealthiest? It's not what anyone voted for. It's putting our economy in danger, and Conference Labour will fight it every step of the way. Conference. Let me tell you what I believe. I believe that hard work should be met with fair reward. I believe that strong public services are the backbone of any decent society. I believe that inequality divides and holds us back as a country. Conference. I believe that the task of building a fairer society is a moral responsibility, and more than that, it is the route to a stronger economy. The truth is at the heart of Labour's plans for growth. And today, I want to tell you why. Last April, on a cold spring evening, I knocked on the door of a constituent. When I reached out to shake her hand, it was purple and freezing cold. Already back then, she was afraid to put the heating on, struggling to get by on the small pension that she had built up through a lifetime of work. As energy bills and inflation rise even higher, I often think of her. Conference, that is the stark reality facing people all around our country today. And while the Prime Minister spent months denying the need for action on energy prices, Labour was calling for a freeze on the energy price cap. Labour was calling for an end to the indefensible premium paid by families with prepayment meters. And crucially, Labour was calling for a windfall tax on the unimaginable profits being made by the oil and gas companies. Because a proper windfall tax would mean that working people didn't have to foot the bill. But the Prime Minister is content to let energy giants pocket the cash and leave your children and your grandchildren to pick up the tab. Under these Tories, those with the broadest shoulders carry the lightest load. And not by accident, but by choice. Conference, it is time for a government that is on your side, and that government is a Labour government. The effects of Putin's war have reverberated around the world, and we will not waver in our support for Ukraine. The causes of this crisis are global, but our unique exposure to rising energy prices is a result of the choices of Conservative governments. Inaction on insulating homes, inaction on renewable and nuclear energy, and the sheer irresponsibility of closing our gas storage facilities. We are feeling the consequences of a 12-year Tory experiment in unilateral energy disarmament. And what's their answer? Lifting the ban on fracking. Conference. Fracking is dangerous, it is bad for the planet, it won't even reduce our bills, and with Labour it will not happen. Here is our alternative, our Green Prosperity Plan, to provide the only sustainable solution to the energy crisis, to free ourselves from dependence on Russia, to invest in solar, in wind, in tidal, in hydrogen and in nuclear power, and to pass on to our children a fairer and a greener country. This is a moral responsibility, and it's an economic necessity. On climate change, the costs of inaction today will mean far greater costs tomorrow. I refuse to leave our children to pick up the pieces of our failure. Conference, I will be a responsible Chancellor. I will be Britain's first Green Chancellor. Ed Miliband has just set out how the next Labour government will cut energy bills for good by generating all of our electricity from clean sources by 2030. But our Green Prosperity Plan is about something else too. It is about economic growth, because British businesses are falling behind in the global race for new industries, and that matters. It matters that the largest offshore wind farm in Scotland has its blades made not in Scotland, but thousands of miles away. It matters that the rest of Europe is powering ahead with electric battery factories, and we are stuck in the slow lane. It matters that Germany, France, and the US are making the running with green hydrogen, but we are not. We have the ability, but we want the jobs here. We want the factories here, and we want British businesses to take the lead. Here is the deal. The next Labour government will create a national wealth fund so that when we invest in new industries, in partnership with business, the British people will own a share of that wealth, and the taxpayer will get a return on that investment. Wealth flowing from jobs in electric battery factories, in the West Midlands, the North East, the North West, and the South West. Offshore wind driving investment in our ports, from the Humber to Southampton, East Anglia to Belfast. Clean steel, with jobs in Rotherham, Sheffield, Scunthorpe, Cardiff, and Port Talbot. And carbon capture in our industrial heartlands, in Grangemouth and in South Wales, in Humber and in Teesside, and here in Merseyside too. Because conference, when I say I want to buy, make and sell more in Britain, I mean it. What you will see in your town, in your city with Labour, is a sight that we have not seen often enough in our country. Cranes going up, shovels in the ground, the sounds and the sights of the future arriving, secure, skilled jobs for plumbers, electricians and joiners, for designers, scientists and engineers. Wealth that will flow back into your community and onto your high street. Wealth that the British people will own a stake in. Wealth that is invested in our country's future. That is a real plan for climate. That is a real plan for growth and conference. That is a real plan for levelling up. A zero-carbon economy, made right here, made in Britain. It is time for a government that is on your side, and that government is a Labour government. And conference, what about the Tories? 6 different plans for growth in 12 years, each announced with great fanfare, each making no difference. A library of failure. Conference. They've had 12 years. Have they got growth up? No. Have they got inflation down? No. Have they got child poverty down? No. Have they got the NHS waiting lists down? No. And have they even got the debt and the deficit down? No. Conference, it's 12 years of failure. And now, they have replaced levelling up with trickle down. An economic philosophy inadequate to a modern world, and a moral philosophy inadequate to a decent society. Trickle-down economics is a very simple idea, that if we just slash taxes and regulation, we will unleash investment and growth. That how wealth is shared doesn't really matter. Vast gaps between people and places, no importance. Workers' rights, consumer protection, strong public services, all worth sacrificing. That wealth is just created by a few people, a few businesses. It's why, at the same time that ministers lecture low-paid workers about showing restraint, that they can't restrain themselves from removing the cap on bankers' bonuses. I dare any Tory MP to tell a nurse or a care worker to their face that what our country needs right now is bigger bonuses for bankers. It's true, trickle-down is a very simple idea and a very wrong one. Not just wrong because it isn't fair. Wrong too, conference, because it doesn't work. Trickle-down is wrong because how wealth is shared does matter to growth. High inequality strangles the spending power of working people. It piles its social costs onto our public services. It suffocates potential. Trickle-down is wrong because in a turbulent world, businesses need government as a partner. Trickle-down is wrong because strong institutions and robust public finances provide the foundations for a strong economy. And trickle-down is wrong, conference, because a strong economy needs strong public services. We will defeat the failed ideas of the past with the focus, the ambition, and the ideas for the future. Conference, here's the truth. Wealth doesn't trickle from the top down. It comes from the bottom up and the middle out, from the talent and the efforts of tens of millions of ordinary people and from thousands of businesses. Our economy needs the most productive, most high-tech businesses to thrive in Britain. And we all rely on what I call the everyday economy, on transport workers and delivery drivers, on supermarket and retail workers, our NHS and care workers. Don't let anyone tell you that they are not wealth creators too. They are key to our security as a society. And yet too many of them are amongst the most insecure, overworked, underpaid, undervalued. The Tories' trickle-down ideology has nothing to offer them beyond longer hours, lower pay, and less respect. Earlier this year, I met a family in Worthing, a mum and dad working 5 jobs between them, struggling to make ends meet, constantly juggling work and childcare. As a family, they only got half a day a week together. They felt that any hope of buying their own home had evaporated. Good people, working hard. And do you know what the mum said to me? She said, "You just wonder if you're doing something wrong." Conference, something is profoundly wrong. And let's be clear, Liz Truss, we've not fallen behind our neighbours on growth, on productivity or on pay, because British workers lack graft. It's not working people that are the problem. Conference, it's this government that is the problem. I'll tell you what a growing economy needs. Rising wages so that money flows back into vibrant high streets. Parents with the time to thrive at work and spend time with their children. Families with enough savings to weather a storm. And people feeling the confidence to take risks, to change career, to learn new skills or start a business. So, with Labour, there'll be no bonfire of workers' rights, as the Tories intend. As Angela Rayner announced, we will introduce a new deal for working people with strengthened rights fit for the times we are in. And that's not all. On day one as Chancellor, I will write to the Low Pay Commission with a simple instruction that the minimum wage will be set at a level that reflects the real cost of living. The last Labour government delivered Britain's first ever national minimum wage. The next Labour government will introduce a genuine living wage. That's how we will give working people security, and that's how we will grow our economy too. It's time for a government that is on your side. And that government is a Labour government. Here's another thing about growing a 21st century economy. It's no longer enough, if it ever was, for government to simply get out of the way. The challenges of global instability, of pandemics, wars, and climate crisis demand that government work in partnership with business. If I were Chancellor right now, I would bring together a National Economic Council that will bring together industry and trade unions, so working people and businesses were at the heart of economic decision-making. I have been privileged in this job to visit businesses across our country, from Rolls-Royce in Derby, pioneering research into carbon-neutral aviation, to Oxford Nanopore, leading work on DNA and RNA sequencing, right through to local businesses like Castleton Mill, once a key part of West Yorkshire's textiles industry, and now a collaborative space for freelancers, remote workers, and startups. The world is changing fast, but the British capacity for enterprise, for innovation, and for hard work remains undimmed. When I talk to business, they don't tell me that their #1 priority is corporation tax. They tell me about the need for properly targeted investment allowances, the need for workers equipped with the right skills, the need for certainty and a sense of direction from government, and yes, the need for a sensible working relationship with our European neighbours. So we will take those issues head on, starting with the biggest tax problem facing British businesses. Our unfair, outdated system of business rates punishes high street businesses to the advantage of online giants. So Labour will level the playing field. We will abolish business rates and replace them with a fairer system fit for the 21st century. That new system will mean that businesses would get revaluation discounts straight away, rather than waiting for years for their money back. And here's more. Today, Jonathan Reynolds launched our modern industrial strategy that recognises the importance of businesses at the high-tech frontier and of our everyday economy. It sets out a mission to make our economy more secure. We will use all powers at government disposal to buy, make and sell more here in Britain. We will make Britain the best place to start and grow a business, guided by the work of our Startup Review, headed by Lord Jim O'Neill. And we will give our nations and regions, mayors and local leaders right across Britain, the tools to shape their own future. In Labour-run Wales under Mark Drakeford, in our city regions and all around the country, we are seeing the difference that Labour can make in power. And Steve Rotherham, thank you for the leadership that you show here in Merseyside. And conference, if you're remotely serious about growth, then you've got to make Brexit work. Our agriculture and our food industries rely on trade right across Europe, but we have a deal that doesn't even include a veterinary agreement. We are pioneers in creative industries, but we have a deal which ties them in knots over visas. We are the second largest exporter of services in the world, but we have a deal that doesn't include the mutual recognition of professional qualifications. So we will fix the holes in the government's patchwork Brexit deal. And instead of picking needless fights with our largest trading partner, we will work together with our neighbours and our allies in our national interest. That is Labour's approach, proudly pro-worker and proudly pro-business, supporting innovation, sharing opportunity, reviving our high streets. Conference, it is time for a government that is on your side, and that government is a Labour government. I am proud to have started my career as an economist at the Bank of England. Its operational independence is an enduring contribution by the last Labour government to Britain's financial stability. Growth and social justice must be built on firm foundations. Yet this government has undermined the bank's independence, sacked the respected permanent secretary to the Treasury, and gagged the Office for Budget Responsibility. The Chancellor and Prime Minister, meanwhile, resemble two desperate gamblers in a casino, chasing a losing run. But here's the thing, they're not gambling with their money, they're gambling with yours. They've lost credibility, they're losing confidence, they're out of control. And I've said this before conference, but be in no doubt, there can be no return to austerity. It has left our country poorer, our public services at breaking point, and our public finances in tatters. I make this promise to you. Labour will not waver in our commitment to fiscal responsibility. That is why I set out the fiscal rules for the next Labour government a year ago. Every policy that Labour announces and every line in our manifesto will be carefully costed and fully funded. Last year, I told this conference that I was more than happy to take on the Tories when it came to economic competence, because I know we can win. I'm now wondering whether they even plan to show up for the fight. It's becoming clearer by the day. Labour is the party of economic responsibility and the party of social justice. Conference, it's time for a government that is on your side, and that government is a Labour government. Now, we need a growing economy. We need a growing economy to pay for modern, sustainable public services. But a growing economy needs strong public services too. This is personal to me. My mum and dad were primary school teachers. I'm really proud of that. My sister Ellie and I used to play for hours in my dad's classroom while he worked late into the evening, because he wanted the kids that he taught to have the very best start in life. And this was all in the face of Conservative governments hostile to the very idea of public service. I went to school under those governments. I remember what it was like. This is why I joined this party, and it is why I am here today. Strong public services are the foundation of a strong society. And Conference, we owe everything to those who work in our National Health Service. But we also know that our health service today is on its knees. It is a social priority, and it is an economic priority. In the last 3 years, 500,000 people have left the labour market. More than half of those due to long-term illness. So, as Keir Starmer set out a year ago, we will guarantee access to mental health treatment within a month to anyone who needs it. Here's more. We need strong, sustainable public finances alongside strong, sustainable public services. So our priority is not tax cuts for the wealthiest few. It is securing our public finances and investing in our public services. Conference, I can tell you, with a Labour government, those at the top will pay their fair share. The 45p top rate of income tax is coming back. And here's what we'll do with that money. The next Labour government will double the number of district nurses qualifying every year. We will train more than 5,000 new health visitors. We will create an additional 10,000 nursing and midwife places every year. More than that, we will implement the biggest expansion of medical school places in British history, doubling the number of medical students so our NHS has the doctors that it needs. It will fall to us to fix the damage that the Tories have done. We have done it before, and Conference, we will do it again. Know that these are Labour's priorities. Strong public services to support people and grow our economy. A greener, fairer Britain, with jobs for people in Britain. Industries owned by the people of Britain. Profits shared with the people of Britain. Pro-business and pro-worker for a stronger economy, where you do well. Because when you do well, Britain does well. Hope and opportunity, whoever you are, wherever you live. That is Labour's vision for Britain. That is what we are fighting for. Let me tell you, it's time for a government that is on your side. That government is a Labour government, and be in no doubt, Conference, that government is on its way. Thank you.
So Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, ending her rousing speech there to Labour Party Conference. They are on their feet. She got a few standing ovations while she was actually speaking. It was a very personal speech from her. You could tell that she was literally laying down, as she sees it, the framework for what she called taking on the Tories on economic competence. And she said, it is a fight that we can win. She ended the speech as she had started and mentioned it a few times throughout, which is, it's time for a government that's on your side, and that is a Labour government. She said there'd be no return to austerity. So, of course, we will have to pledge in terms of what she sets out, any promises that come forth about public spending. She said she'd be Britain's first green chancellor, and she set out what she called a library of failure of 12 years of Conservative rule. Conference now has sat down. That is the end of Rachel Reeves' speech to Conference. We had Andy Burnham here saying he wanted more passion and he wanted Labour to have more fight. Do you think we heard it there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a passionate speech. I think there was a sense of belief to it. There is clearly now two very different competing economic visions for the country, two different economic strategies. For me, the key line there from Rachel was this idea of we grow the economy from the middle to the bottom out. That's very similar to the Biden approach. That's very different to what we're seeing from this Conservative government, which is we boost the people up at the top and we hope it trickles down. Two very different strategies, and they seem to believe in their strategy.
What did you make of it?
I think that's probably the most rousing speech by a Labour Shadow Chancellor I've seen in quite a few years. And obviously you think back to when John McDonnell was the Shadow Chancellor, he got Conference very excited with radical policies. Rachel Reeves got Conference excited about the idea of a Labour government, and you can feel within that hall she got two standing ovations. That what's getting the Conference excited is the idea they can actually see and feel it happening for the first time, because you contrast with what she's saying with actually a quite small C Conservative approach here. You know, in terms of tax, Rachel Reeves said the 45p rate is going to come back and that will be used to fund nurses. Didn't talk about income tax, didn't talk about national insurance. Of course, Labour opposed that to start with. But I thought the most interesting thing was how personal it was, because Rachel Reeves is maybe not the most well-known of personalities within Labour. If you think of people like Keir Starmer and Wes Streeting, they've had many more newspaper profiles about them. But she talked about when she grew up with her sister Ellie, who's also a Labour MP, and she also reminded us she used to be a Bank of England economist as well. Again, adding the sense that she really believes in what she's doing and she's got the experience to try and be a successful chancellor and take the approach Miatta was talking about.
I mean, she says she has the credentials to do the job of being chancellor rather than shadow chancellor, Miatta. But did you hear enough? You say there's clear blue water or red water between the Conservatives and Labour when it comes to their economic prospectus. But in a way, is she not trying to occupy, Rachel Reeves, the centre ground? She thinks it's been vacated by the Conservatives. Will that be radical enough for the people here and people beyond Labour Party conference?
Well, so what I'd say is the centre ground of politics isn't a fixed thing. No. It changes. So the centre ground of politics today is different to the centre ground of politics in the 1980s. And for me, the centre ground of politics is saying we need big change in the country because from the climate crisis that Rachel talked about through to the cost of living crisis, there are massive issues we face, which requires an interventionist government, which is the thing that she sets out, and also requires big ideas like, to be fair, the kind of green pledge is huge. So there is still more detail. I think they still need to set out a prospectus. There's still about 18 months, potentially 2 years from a general election. But I think we have the contours of something that feels very different to what we've seen go by.
Do they have to, Labour, set out much more detail? I know this is the opposite of what I've just posed to Miatta. They are in opposition.
Yeah.
Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng would like to say this is a new government, despite the fact that it is another Conservative government. There hasn't been an election and so on and so forth. Do they need to do anything that bold? Could they just sit and watch what happens over the next 18 months?
Well, that'll be their natural instinct, because obviously the old adage, you don't interrupt your enemy while they're making mistakes, probably goes for what's happening with the economy from Labour's perspective at the moment. But I think the problem for oppositions is you put forward ideas. For example, let's have a windfall tax. Rishi Sunak did a windfall tax. Let's freeze energy bills. Kwasi Kwarteng's frozen energy bills. So all of Labour's big policies have actually been taken or stolen by the Conservatives. And I think on tax policy, that is the trickiest, because as you were saying, 2 years to the next general election, if you announce what you're going to do now, you've got no idea what the economy is going to look like, no idea if we're going to be growing, if we're going to be in recession, and how you deal with that. But I think the thing that you saw here is you can see the architecture of what Rachel Reeves is talking about. Yes, you've got the Green Revolution. Yes, you've got fairer taxation, which is their code for raising taxes on the wealthiest. The challenge for Labour is going to be, though, that if they do go down this route of saying we're going to reverse all of Kwasi Kwarteng's tax rises, at next week's Tory party conference, they'll be saying it's Labour, the party of tax rises, a tax on aspiration. And we've been through that pretty much every general election you can imagine.
And that's a problem, isn't it?
Yes and no. I think a lot of the polling suggests that people get the difference between tax cuts to the rich. I think if they had gone for more expansive progressive tax, I think it would have been an easier track for Labour. But I mean, it was a very odd set of interventions that are gearing tax cuts at the top deliberately, because they seem to believe that that will trickle down. And I think people are sceptical about it. So I think there is a fine line that Labour potentially could travel that allows it to potentially stay on the up on this.
And on this idea of no return to austerity, we don't know when the next election is going to be. We think it's 2024 from everything we've heard so far. And in terms of Rachel Reeves's plans, she won't know if Labour were to win the next election what she's going to inherit. Can she really say no return to austerity when you look at the potentially difficult circumstances with rising inflation, for example?
Well, I think she can, because I think the lesson of austerity was a catastrophic failure. And again, I go back to history. We chose the tack of austerity in 2010 versus America that chose to invest in their economy. We saw our public realm decimated. We're still feeling the pain of that now. And we didn't see the reverse into the impact in terms of public finances or growth in the economy. So I think they can say that strategy doesn't work. But they then need an answer to what you're going to do. And, you know, we haven't heard much about tax and spend. I think there has got to be a conversation about progressive taxation and what that looks like in order to invest in public services.
But I think what you can see, though, is Labour is just trying to be very cautious. And I come back to what I said. This was actually a small C Conservative speech. It was talking about having a fully costed budget, about having fiscal restraint, about not spending too much money. It's the opposite of what you saw in the Jeremy Corbyn years, which was essentially throw the kitchen sink, you know, and just spend and renationalise, do everything to take a very different different vision of what the economy would look like. From Rachel Reeves, I don't think she wants to fundamentally change what the economy looks like. It's more tinkering with it.
I disagree with that. I disagree with that. Everything we are hearing, whether it's public ownership of transport, whether it's the National Wealth Fund, and for me the key point about that fund is the idea of transferring wealth and ownership to the public so that we benefit. I think there is something quite different to the thing that we've seen before. They need to flesh it out, but potentially I'm excited because I see some of our ideas coming through here, and these are not the status quo ideas, they're very different ideas.
But on the progressive taxation that you mentioned, you'd like to see more or bolder policies. What are you talking about?
I don't think there's a world in which we get away from looking at wealth tax. We've got to equalise the tax that we put on, that people pay through wealth versus the tax that they pay on incomes, and that becomes a route by which you can fund up public services. So we haven't heard anything about that, but I don't expect we'll hear that 18 months from a general election, but it's got to be part of the mix.
Well, let's put that to Tulip Siddiq, who has joined us from the Treasury team, from Labour's Treasury team. Welcome to Politics Live. On that issue, I will get your reaction more broadly, of course, to what Rachel Reeves has said, and you've been part of the team, no doubt, talking about that speech that she's just given to Labour Party conference. But what about a more progressive taxation policy being outlined by Labour right now if there's a general election in 18 months' time, and the possibility of a wealth tax?
Well, what I'd say initially is that when you heard what happened on Friday, you've all heard it, and for us, the number one priority is we cannot give a tax cut to the richest in society, which is exactly what Kwasi Kwarteng was proposing on Friday. So you heard very clearly and firmly in Rachel Reeves' speech that we will reverse the 45% top rate of taxation. There's no doubt about that.
But you're going to keep the cut in the basic rate of income tax?
Yeah, we will keep the cut in the basic rate. And let me explain a little bit further. I only caught the tail end of the conversation you were having, but you were saying this is a small C conservative speech, Seb. You were saying that. The truth is, we don't know what the landscape will be like when we get into government. So it's very hard for us to say, well, actually, we're going to reverse all sorts of taxation. But what I will say to you, and you know my constituency, Hampstead and Coburn, in a constituency where there is pockets of very big affluence and poverty, everyone I've spoken to does not understand why the richest in society would pay less tax at a time when we're going through the cost of living crisis. It just doesn't make sense. And can I just finish by saying that even if you're not political, the people I speak to, no one has an objection about paying more tax if it means funding public services properly.
So are you going to go into the next election saying, we will put up your taxes? We're going to put up your taxes. We think it's fair to do so, to pay for fully funded public services, your schools and hospitals.
Well, we've already outlined today, well, Rachel has in her speech, that by reversing the tax that they've said, the tax cut that they're giving to the wealthiest in society.
Fine. So you're going to do that?
What we are going to do is use that money to fund public services. And you've heard a very bold announcement about, I think it's the biggest expansion of NHS workers and doctors and medical places in British history, which I'm sure you just heard about.
Right, but you are supporting, as I put to your colleague Nick Thomas-Symonds, quite a large amount of the government's borrowing programme. You support the cut in national insurance contributions, the reversal of the 1.25 percentage points. That amounts to about £13 billion a year. You support the cut, as I said, to the basic rate of income tax. That's £5 billion a year. And you support the cap on energy bills, which costs £10 billion every single month. Now, Rachel Reeves has criticised the government for being, as she says, irresponsible with the public finances, and that everything Labour does will be fully costed, but it will be borrowing tens of billions of pounds in exactly the same way as the government.
After years and years of austerity, what we're not going to do is sit here and play politics. If there's some policies that they're putting forward which will get the economy back on the road, increase growth, then some of them we will support. But what I can tell you is I don't understand why the government won't continue with their windfall tax, which they said they're getting rid of, because that would have actually helped.
But Rachel Reeves has criticised the government because she's saying they're borrowing all this money at a time when the cost of servicing that debt, the cost of borrowing, is going up, and it's going up extremely fast. But you would do the same.
Well, what we're saying, we've heard our policies. You've heard our policy about reversing tax cut for the richest.
Yes, but I've set out how much. But you will aid quite a lot of the borrowing, and it will cost and would cost the Labour government a huge amount of money.
Our priorities are different. We want to invest in public services. That is not what the government's doing. If you think putting a cap, removing the cap on bankers' bonuses is the right thing to do at a time when my constituents can't afford to feed their children, there's something wrong with the priorities.
Well, let's look at one of the things she did say, which was the next Labour government will introduce a genuine living wage. What does that look like in terms of pounds and pence? We've been looking at the figures. You can correct me if they're not exactly right in terms of the real living wage and the national living wage as it stands now, but it's in the region of £10.90 in London and £9.50 outside. What would you set that at then?
It's impossible to say exactly what we would set it at because we don't know what the financial situation will be by the time we are in government. This is based on us winning the next election. What I will tell you is the way it's formed is looking at the cost of living, how much things cost, how much does it cost you to rent your house, how much does it cost you to get around. That's how the London living wage was set. As a London MP, I know how much it's helped my constituents, and that's how those are the principles underpinning a policy of a real living wage.
Just the reaction from you, Miatta, you've done work on this. What would you like it to be in the ballpark of?
So we've looked at the analysis, and if you use this metric called the minimum income standard, which is like how much does a basket of goods cost you, then actually for someone in London it's about £15 an hour. So the Local Pay Commission will be the one to determine this, but the mandate that it must reflect the true cost of living, I think, is absolutely the right one, and it would take us to a much, much higher level than the one that we have at the moment.
All right, well, your reaction?
I mean, my reaction to you is to say that even when I go to the supermarket now, I see how much more food costs, and I have seen that work doesn't pay for a lot of my constituents and people around the country. So we'd have to look at what real things cost before deciding on it. I wouldn't say it's an easy decision, but I think it's the right decision to increase it.
Well, let's get some more reaction and talk to Craig Beaumont, who is from the Federation of Small Businesses. Hello to you, Craig. First of all, your reaction to what you heard from Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor.
Well, it was a good speech. So we've clearly got Labour now on the territory where it wants a partnership with business, and that's a real change and a very welcome one. So we can now look forward perhaps to a general election in, 2 years' time, with the two main parties fighting for business endorsement, and that's a really good place to be. And in terms of policy, she's announced the Economic Council, but she also announced something quite big on business rates. So Labour's already adopted a plan to remove 200,000 small businesses from business rates by increasing the small business threshold. That's great, but they're now going to do annual revaluations and getting rid of this transitional relief, half of it, which means that people whose bills go down quicker. So this is all good, and I think a signal of where Labour's now headed. We will need to see more detail, of course, and more announcements, but yeah, a good speech.
Well, what was missing for you?
Well, there were some of the government's announcements last week that we really welcomed. One of them, of course, was the energy package. I'm pretty sure Labour will support the energy package. The other was the national insurance reversal, which is also Labour policy. So that's good. I suppose from the other things, the IR35 is going to be quite an interesting zone because the government's defanged it to some degree, and that really helps small self-employed sole traders at the kind of lower end of the economy. So I guess I'd want to see what Labour's view is on that. And then on the corporation tax hike that's now been cancelled, of course Labour would keep it, and we have told Labour we don't agree with them on that specific, even though it's not for us a top flight priority.
On the corporation tax, I've got Tulip Siddiq from the Treasury team in the Labour Party. What's your reaction on the corporation tax? Would you do what the government has said it will do, which is cancel the rise?
No. We wouldn't.
You wouldn't?
So, no, we wouldn't. So we think we would abolish business rates. You heard Rachel Reeves say that. We don't think it's the right thing for business at the moment in terms of corporation tax, but I also think that's not what businesses that I speak to need right now, to be honest. I think we need more innovative solutions. We need a plan for growth, but business tax for us is the main thing that we would be focusing on at the moment.
And what about the energy package that you heard Craig talk about?
So we are looking at the details of the energy packet. I have repeatedly asked my opposite number on the Conservative benches for the details. I haven't got all of it yet. You'll be surprised to know. If it ends up taking £400 off people's energy bills, it's something we will support. But can I just add by saying, I am surprised at why at a time like this, they are saying that they want to get rid of the windfall tax. It's about 2 weeks ago that they said they wanted to tax the profits of big energy companies. What's the reason for that? And that's what I want to know, because I think it would make a massive difference to people in the long term. That's what I'm worried about. I don't want short-term solutions. I also want to hear about long-term solutions.
The thing on the windfall tax, Tulip, is that the government's own estimate said it would bring in about maximum £5 billion, and the energy package is £100 billion, so it's really a drop in the ocean. And they're not cancelling the existing windfall tax, but they are not bringing another one. And I guess the question is, Labour's used this figure of £170 billion of excess profits, but that's worldwide, not within the UK. If you did another windfall tax, how much extra money would it bring in? And it probably wouldn't go anywhere near far enough for paying for the energy package.
You know how bad energy bills are getting for people. Do you think we should be doing every single thing possible to reduce energy bills, or do you think we should just pick and choose?
It's about paying for the windfall.
Yeah.
This is about paying for the package, not whether you're doing the package, because Labour is broadly supportive of the government's
Well, once we've seen the details of the full details.
There's just one thing, sorry, and I'll come back to you, Craig, in just a moment. On the energy bills, I mean, Keir Starmer was asked about this yesterday by my colleague Laura Kunsberg, that the fact that Labour's offer only lasts for 6 months, which is actually the point at which gas prices, energy prices, will peak. What are you going to do after that?
Well, we'll have to look at what other policies we can bring forward, obviously,
so
but we just
allow
don't
people
see...
to worry that their bills could rise to £5,000, £6,000 a year before you come up with the solution.
I mean, the reason we're in this mess is because of years and years of austerity. So we have to take one step at a time. So we would look at bringing in a policy which would help them initially, but then we would come up with further policies as well. I mean, the truth is that energy costs are going to rise, and we've got to take some dramatic measures. So I'm not saying...
So you are guaranteeing that you will have more help for people as a proposal?
I mean, I think we have to. I don't think people can afford it otherwise.
All right, well, look, I just want to show you briefly, and Craig, I want you to respond in just a moment, because Kwasi Kwarteng, the Chancellor, was approached by journalists a little earlier. Let's just have a little look if we can. I don't think he said anything at all, but let's have a look.
Chancellor, what are you going to do about the turmoil on the markets this morning, sir?
I'm not going to make any comment now. Thank you.
Well, what about the city? What conversations are you having with the Bank of England, sir? Do you have anything to say about what's going on, sir? Are you planning to reverse the announcement you made last Friday, sir?
They keep asking Kwasi Kwarteng, and there's absolutely no or very little response. Perhaps unsurprisingly, when he, like everyone else, has seen what's happened to the pound against the dollar. Craig Beaumont, your response to what you heard from Kwasi Kwarteng on Friday. Various business groups did actually support the budget initially. Do you think they did that too soon?
No, because for us, there's a lot of help in there. There's tens of billions of pounds worth. I mean, you're talking about the energy package just then, but you were talking about domestic customers. There wasn't anything from business from February all the way through to now. So that's really important that businesses will now get help. Interestingly, the government has put a 6-month limit before a review on that as well. So that's actually in line with Labour. We need both Labour and the Conservatives to look at that 6-month cliff edge and make sure it's not like that. I think in terms of the turmoil of the markets, you know, I'm not an economist, so I can't really work this out. However, what we do need to see is, you know, real help for small businesses, which we've now got from those 2 big items on Friday, but now we need to see certainty for the economy. So in terms of inflation, in terms of interest rates, raising interest rates looks very, very likely now, and that has an impact on small businesses because of the loans that they have, some of which are CBILS loans from COVID, but some are commercial, and of course small business owners have mortgages on their houses as well.
Right, well, Tulip, what do you say? I mean, they're warm welcome, broadly, to the 2 big items for business, or certainly for small businesses, from the budget on Friday.
Well, business rates, first of all, to comment on the fact that the Chancellor walks by and says he can't respond to any of the question, I think really shows the lack of ideas coming from the government. But for us, we've been absolutely clear. The problem I've seen with small and medium-sized businesses all across the country, ever since I've taken on this role, is the fact that they're competing with digital companies and they can't get a foot in the door. For us, abolishing business rates and finding a fair way of taxation is the right way to do it.
Your response to Kwasi Kwarteng?
I was going to say, obviously, Chancellors tend not to comment on market-moving matters, but I don't think anyone's going to look at that clip and feel particularly reassured about the situation. And the Chancellor does have a fine line to walk, because he wants to be seen being on top of it, to have a grip, but at the same time not cause further panic. So there's no talk of an emergency meeting with the Bank of England or the MPC, the Monetary Policy Committee, meeting to do an emergency rate rise. So at the moment, I think the Chancellor will want to just try and keep things steady.
Look,
but as you look at that,
but you can't really defend the fact that the Chancellor has taken over at the worst cost of living crisis in our country, just walks by and he says he has nothing to comment.
Well,
I mean,
on that,
you wouldn't let us do that, Seb.
Let me just get Miatta in. Do you expect there will be? I mean, we are expecting a further rate rise.
I think there will be. I mean, I think the problem is, it's one thing not commenting, but when you look spooked, you look absolutely terrified, it gives no one any confidence. We've got a bizarre situation now where, on the one hand, the Bank of England's going to be increasing rates, contracting the economy as the government's trying to stimulate it. It's absolute madness.
And on that, goodbye from all of us here. Bye-bye.